ग्लोबल स्किल डेवलपमेंट मिशन में आपका स्वागत है।
Okay, we're ready to move on to another section of the course that's going to relate to working with selections inside Photoshop. Now, getting good at making decent selections inside your photographs, inside your projects, and so on is really important. Selections are going to be used whenever you want to apply a special effect to a specific area of your image, or perhaps some color effects or color adjustments and so on. Really, I think a huge part of Photoshop is all about selections. So let's get started here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open up one of our project files. I'm going to open up windows.jpg, and this file is going to get us started working with some of the more fundamental aspects of creating selections. So here's our photo, okay? And what I want to do is I want to get ourselves started with this first selection tool, the rectangular marquee tool. It's a bit of a mouthful. Most people just call it the rectangular selection tool, or the square selection tool, or this thingamajiggy over on the left. Anyway, so go ahead and grab that guy. You can tap your M key on your keyboard if you want. Now, this guy is going to allow us to create, as its name would imply, rectangular selections. Okay, so all I want you to do at this stage of the game, maybe between the two windows here, is just click and drag out with your mouse, just something like this. Okay, and while I'm holding down my mouse, notice I get some marching ants. I call them the marching ants. And then I also get this this tooltip appearing, giving me the width and the height of my current selection. That's handy sometimes when I want to make a very precise selection inside Photoshop. As soon as I let go of my mouse, there's my marching ants sitting there on screen. Okay, so then now what I could do is I could maybe apply a special effect to this area of the image, or again a color effect, or some kind of a filter or something like that. Okay? Now, how do I get rid of this selection? I've created this selection, I now want to get rid of it. Well, what I could do is I could head up to the Select menu up at the top, and then down to Deselect, the second choice there. There we go. Okay? Now, let's get a little bit more practical, a little bit more real world. What I want to try and do is I want to select some of the rectangular shapes that we have inside these barn windows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control or Command and Spacebar, and I'm going to zoom in on these windows, something like this, and I'll just kind of pan over here, holding down my spacebar. And what I want to do is I want to try and select this first window pane here. So what I would do is I would bring my cursor up towards, for example, the top left corner, and then click and drag down to the bottom right corner, something like that. Okay, maybe I want to knock this area out, maybe I want to knock them all out, and I'm going to put a photograph into the window frame itself, something like that. Okay? Now, as far as actually working with your selections, I've got a bunch of different things to show you here. We already know how to get rid of the marching ants. If I make a selection and then I want to get rid of this selection, I can go to the Select menu and I can choose Deselect. You could also hit Control or Command D on your keyboard to get rid of your marching ants. Or here's my favorite. You have a selection here on your photograph or inside your image, something like this. You want to get rid of the marching ants. Just bring your cursor outside of the selection, outside of the marching ants, and just single click. That's all there is to it. Okay? All right, now there's a bunch of other things that I want to show you in terms of the fundamentals of working with selections. Check this out. If I start clicking and dragging with my mouse, sometimes you don't get it right on the first try, by the way. Sometimes you'll try and select this window frame, for example, but notice that I'm off on the top corner there. No good, right? So as you're clicking and dragging, in other words, while I still have my mouse button held down or pressed down, I can hold down the space bar simultaneously, and now I can move my selection around inside my photo. So maybe I want to tuck it right up into the top left corner of this window pane, let go of my spacebar. I haven't let go of my mouse just yet, and then I can continue dragging the selection, something like that. So that's a really good trick for you as you're working with your selections. Okay, so again, just holding down the spacebar, repositioning the selection wherever you want it inside your image, let go of the spacebar, and then continue dragging with your mouse until you get things happening for yourself inside your image. Okay? All right. So this is all fine and well. This is creating rectangular selections, of course. What about creating squares? Well, give this a try. While I'm clicking and dragging out with my mouse, I'm going to throw down the Shift key I felt like I was, that was a little bit gangster, wasn't it? Throw down. I'm going to hold down my shift key. That's really what I meant. Something like this. So now I'm getting a perfect square in whatever size, whatever dimensions I want. Okay, so we're throwing down the selections here. And by the way, as I'm throwing down my square here, I can throw down my spacebar as well. Move this guy around, get him positioned to where I want. Let go of the spacebar. I'm still holding down shift, and then I can continue dragging. So there you go. Pretty cool stuff. How about this one? Try holding down either Alt if you're on the Windows side or Option here on the Mac, and we can create a selection from the center rather than from a corner, something like this. And wouldn't you know it, I can hold down Alt or Option and Shift and create a square from the center, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to admit something to you. Working with your selections does take a little bit of practice, does take a little bit of getting used to. This is why we're going to spend a little bit of time working on these guys, because I want to make sure you get good at creating your selections. Here's one final takeaway before we move on to the next selection tool. As I'm creating my selection, or I should say really after I create my selection, let's just say something like this, right? I'm just going to throw this in really quickly here. What I can do is I can bring my cursor inside the marching ants. Notice what happens to my cursor, by the way, when I do that. I get this kind of this white arrow, and now I can actually move this selection around inside my document. I can't change the size of the selection, not yet anyway. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a little while, but for the time being anyway, I can move the selection around inside my photo like so, okay? So there you go. There's a whole bunch of different techniques for you to get used to. Get comfortable with those, practice them for a minute maybe, and then I'll catch up with you in the next exercise where we'll take a look at the elliptical selection tool.